understand that Uganda as a nation, as a country, we have a vision. And our vision is to transform this society, this peasant society, into a prosperous one by 2040. So we have taken some time planning to ensure that this vision is achieved. So we started our plan 15 years ago and blocked this plan, this national vision, into what we call National Development Plan for 5 years. And we have so far covered 2 national development plans, and we have now worked out and finished the 3rd national development plan, whose goal is to increase the household income and improve the quality of life of Ugandans. And to achieve this, we set priorities. Among other priorities, we have value addition, which is an important priority because we have to add value to everything that we produce so that we can earn exports out of this value addition. We also want to increase the stock of infrastructure. We have laid a foundation, and as I will be explaining in a minute, laid a foundation on our infrastructure. We need to continue increasing the stock of our infrastructure. We also need to increase productivity through irrigation, supporting the farmers so that whatever we are planting, we can get maximum yield out of this. And we'll be increasing the role of the state in management of the economy. And to achieve these priorities, we have divided these priorities into what we call programs. Because, Charles, as you realize, we have been working for a while now in silos as government. So we want, if, for example, you want to increase productivity in your own area, you need a road to transport what we have planted. You need water. You need to train the farmers. You need electricity to process. And because we are one government, we want everybody to look at the output at the end of the day and to focus on what will be, how we will support this farmer, not necessarily to work in silos. So these are our priorities, and these are the approach that we want to take in the next 5 years. It also should also be noted that financing should be looked at with other factors in the economy, and also the broader trends, where we are coming from and where we are going. Charles, if I may, in 1986, that is when the NRM government came into power, our GDP was only $40 million US, but as we speak now, it is 37 billion US dollars. Our domestic revenue mobilization was only 5 billion, but as we speak now, we are at 18 trillion. So we have moved so far, which means that actually our tax to GDP, which was 0.9% in 1986, is now at 12.5%. The population trend, you know, in 1986, our population was 14.7, but as we speak, our population now is 41.5 million, and will be 101 million in 2050. And yet, the budget, when you look at the budget, the requirements that we need to sustain this population, the revenue that we are collecting, the budget for this financial, for example, was 41 trillion. So you have a population that is increasing.
41 or 45?
It was, I beg your pardon, 45.
Yeah.
The population, the one which is 41. 41 trillion. The population is 41. So the point I'm making is, you have this ambitious plan to achieve. The population is increasing. The revenue, yes, is increasing. But the budget is also, which is actually the monetary value of these priorities, is also increasing. So over time, you have a gap between what you want to, the amount of money you need to finance the priorities that you have set up yourself, and at the same time the revenue that we are collecting. That's why we are putting in place a revenue mobilization strategy to ensure that we raise more money to finance the budget that, that the priorities that we want. And because of that, because of the need to finance our priorities, because of the resources that we have in terms of domestic revenue, that gap has got to be financed by mobilizing resources through borrowing. So as we speak now, our structure of the debt, if I may talk about it, will now stand at 15.26 billion. That's our total debt portfolio, 15.26 billion. And out of this, 10.37 is external, while 4.89 is domestic. And we set ourselves a convergence arrangement where we said we should not go beyond 50%. As we speak, we are now at 41%. But when you look at other countries, like Burundi, like Japan, which is now at 20%, Kenya, which is beyond 60%, you will realize that actually Uganda, we are very cautious. We know what it means if we over-borrowed. So, but the most important point, Charles, is what has this debt, when we borrow money, what has it done to the development of our country? And I want to mention a few of the projects that we have been able to accomplish.
If you can do that very fast.
Yeah, if you are watching me from Kampala, just go to Mulago and see the women's hospital. That's part of what our money that we have borrowed has done. Go to Entebbe Express and see. People who go to the east, you can know what we have done at that bridge of River Nile. Those of you who are watching from the land of the brave, Chigezi, we are talking about the schools per sub-county in my constituency, in all those constituencies. We are talking about the roads, for example, in Kabale, that was so bad, and we are able to get money from the World Bank and work on it. You go to Bunyoro, look at the Hoima International Airport now, and those roads in the oil areas. Go to the north, the infrastructure in Koboko, the roads. So you are able now to move from one corner of the country to the other corner of the country. That's what the debt, the money that we are borrowing, we have been able to invest. But I must say, Charles, that while some projects have done very well, there are those projects that have not been able to do very well. Why have they not been able to do well? Well, we carried out a research and found out that there were like 5 issues that were affecting the performance of these loans. The first one was preparedness. The second was the issue of compensation. You get money, you want to pass a road in somebody's land, but has got to be compensated. And in most cases, there are exorbitant costs that we have to pay as government. The second was the issue of management itself, people who manage these projects. And the fourth was to do with procurement. The fourth was to do with procurement. So,
did you say there were 5?
Yes, there
is preparedness. You talked about preparedness. You talked about compensation dynamics. You talked about management of the projects, and then procurement.
Procurement, and then we talked. There were issues to do with approvals. The way it comes from government, the time the project is conceived, through the development committee, through parliament, through cabinet and parliament, and then also on the side of the donors. So what have we done to correct these? Because we have been working long and hard to ensure that these issues that have been affecting the performance of projects are corrected. And one of the things that we have done was to amend the Procurement Act. And now, which has been returned to Parliament, but was to do with a number of things. For example, there were several layers of administrative reviews. There were actually 4. We have been able to reduce them to 2. The preparedness, we have now said, and preparedness actually includes even counterpart funding. We would borrow money, but we don't have the counterpart funding to finance the project. So we have now said If a project does not have counterpart funding, money from government to co-finance the project, then that project should not be approved. We have also said, if you are an accounting officer and you have a project in your ministry, a project is not performing, then you should face sanctions as a manager. So we also, as you know, Charles, and you're a lawyer, we tried to work on the issues of compensation. Some lawyers say maybe we can use the Land Act. Others say we need to amend the Constitution. It's a considered opinion of the Attorney General that there is need for amendment of the Constitution to be able to allow compensation processes eased so that government projects can move quickly. So these are the things that the money that we borrow have been able to achieve, and I think as a broadcaster, a national broadcaster, you should be able to broadcast these things so that people know what we have been able to achieve. These are the challenges that we have been able to face and how we are handling them. There has also been an issue of saying, when you borrow this money, do you really call out to know whether a project is economically viable, the internal rate of return, and others?
Yeah.
Yes, but when we are looking at this, we think that the internal rate of return, the economic viability of a project, should not be looked at in isolation. We put criteria for other factors that we need to consider. We need to consider the economic viability of a project. We also need to look at issues like security, for security reasons. We need to look at issues like connectivity. We need to look at issues like political issues. You go to Nebi, for example, there is a road which needs to be, the people of Nebi want a road to be made there. So these are issues that we look at in addition to the internal rate of return. We think that every part of Uganda is economically viable, because every part of Uganda is actually a planning unit for our country. So, so that should be looked at in the context, in the broader context of the economy, the factors that in play of the economy. It should be looked at how much have we been able to achieve out of this, and on the balance of things, I think we are doing very well when you look at where we were in 1986, when His Excellency the President stepped on the steps of Parliament and said, actually this is not a change of mere guards, but it's a fundamental change. We think actually a fundamental change is happening, and that's why we are saying, please look at securing your future in terms of the coming politics.
Okay, thank you. I deliberately, Dr. Muhumuza, I deliberately gave the minister ample time to, because this is a very wide, diverse topic. Things to do with the economy, and to allow him explain for us why they borrow, where we are at in terms of the borrowed funds, and he has stated it, perhaps to say that in summary, we now have almost up to 56 trillion shillings in public debt. That is translated from the technical figure of $15 billion.
Yes.
Now, let's start from where he has left at. Would you say that it's fair for government, and Honorable Bahati here, to compare Uganda now from Uganda which is 1986? Let's start from breaking that down. Is it economically viable, so to speak, for government to be taking us back to that when the dynamics are so huge 35 years later?
Yeah, thank you, Charles, and thank you, Minister, for a very good, detailed kind of conversation. Really, I think, I don't think it is fair to go that far back, because one of the
Why not?
One of the issues.
Why shouldn't government do that?
One of the issues you have raised is about the debt rising so fast. So if you go so far back in time, then you lose the gist of this discussion. Because the debt that we're talking about at 15 billion was actually 11.5 just in December 2018. So I think that's the concern. that we're moving so fast and the economy is not generating that much thrust to deal with that debt. So that for me should be the first concern. So don't go too far back, because I will lose the reason why, that reference point. Because the conversation is we are borrowing too fast. Why? And that's number one. And he has rightfully and ably brought the reasons. It's not about the projects you do. It's about what was the intention of those projects. Because that's what pays the debt. If anybody has borrowed to build a house, and we've been reading in the papers, landlords who have lost their buildings, really. They borrowed money, they put up those structures. But the structures are not productive to them. So we should be concerned to say what is coming out of the investments in the energy sector. Because the intention was, let's borrow to become competitive. Now, if you do not become competitive, then it means the intention has not come through. Something is wrong somewhere. So you might have put the project there, but you are still not competitive, that the used clothes will still outcompete your own cotton. And you are not going to begin punishing people by saying, let's put a ban. Now remember, you borrowed to get competitiveness and you have not picked it up. Something is wrong and you need to fix that. You still have sugar coming all the way from Brazil and I don't know where, rice, and it's still getting to Uganda. Even after putting a tax, it's still outcompeting us. So I don't want to be able to judge the purpose of borrowing by what has come out, but rather by the outcome of that investment in terms of competitiveness, in terms of giving us resilience as an economy, such that even if COVID comes and shakes us, you are still able to stand. Even if you lose out people and they have no jobs, you are still able to pay unemployment benefits. We quickly run. Japan's debt to GDP can be 234%.
But Japan is the third economy in the world.
And it is paying unemployment benefits for its people who have no jobs. So you go back and say, should I go by the debt to GDP ratio? Is that the right indicator? The right indicator should be, what is it costing you to service that debt? Which is sending me back to the previous conversation. If the debt did not generate capacity in the economy, for the economy to become productive and generate sufficient resources for you to service that debt, then don't compare yourself with those who are achieving that. You have a bigger problem. Today we are literally borrowing to pay back debt. We call it a Ponzi scheme. Soon everybody will watch and say, would this Uganda really pay me back? If they are right now borrowing to pay debt, then there might come a time when they will come to me and say, I'm unable to pay. A country like Argentina has defaulted 9 times. Is Uganda going there? When I look at the global ratings, the B rating that we get, is that's a diplomatic way. But in reality, we interpret Uganda's rating today as non-investment grade. Yet these investments were intended to attract investors. But when investors sit in their boardrooms, wherever they are, and they have their millions of dollars, they would like to bring to us, they will be looking at Uganda as non-investment grade. Now these should be the things that are concerning and should be concerning us, that we borrowed with an objective. The objective is not coming through. What could be wrong? And the minister has rightfully hinted on some of these things. The projects are stalling. They are not as fast. They are too expensive. We have a lot of corruption. And we also have, in a number of cases, we fail to find the counterpart funding. So we have a lot of untriggered resources. We borrowed, but the donor is saying, before I release the money, where is the counterpart funding? So we need to really have a good conversation that is technical, and then present that technical discussion to the political spaces for them to be able to take the right decisions. So I think, Honorable Minister, where he sits, he's doing a good job at the political level, but he has not been given a good technical brief of what this means, so that he can literally engage in a political conversation that gives the country the hope that we would really want to have. because I am worried of that speed. To jump from 11 trillion 2 years ago, and now you are at 15 trillion.
I was actually looking at the figure. I was looking at the figure, which is something that maybe you can start taking stock of. Just 15 years ago, in 2006, Honorable talked about the last 15 years comparison. Our debt was about $1.6 billion. $1.6 billion. Today, we are talking of 56 trillion already. And in 2017, if my research is correct, in 2017 we were doing 9.4 billion.
Yes.
2018 we had gone by two more billion, 11, and then that jumped. Last year it was 12. Now it has gone to the figure that we are talking about. So that's really a sharp rise. Bringing me to maybe Julius, do you think that Honorable talked about the return on investment that should not be the only measure? Because it is a government. Government is supposed to relay services or spread services to every part of Uganda. So you cannot argue only economically, on economic viability. You need to argue based on service delivery, because it is a government. Is that the right, should we accept that that should be the right argument? And if it is so, what should then we be advising government to do, especially in positions like yours?
Thanks, and thanks, Honorable, for a very good background. It is really very important of what debt has done for us. I remember I would joke with him that you can now drive from Chisoro to Koboko in one
That's
day.
True.
I mean, you know, from Bondobujo to the airport, you have your tomatoes. You know, I think the value you can see the value, and for me is, I have not any rich country has debts.
Yes, that's the standard.
So it's not that borrowing is bad. I think borrowing is not bad, but I think that's what Mum is saying. That what are you borrowing for? So, and if you're borrowing for service delivery, in itself there are returns. Because if you want to invest in education, if you want to invest in health, if you want to invest in ensuring that there is clean and safe water, all those things have return to investment. I think the biggest challenge we have in this country, for me, is project management, and he has touched it. Is project management. My advice to government is on project management, because it took 5 years to build a railway, Uganda railway from Mombasa to Kampala. That's what they told me. And it is taking us almost 20 years to finish the northern bypass. So what does that mean? So this should have already sorted out the traffic jam in Kampala. So why do we have projects like those that store that we cannot be able to get service delivery? So let's fix project management. And the minister has talked about accounting officers, people who are managing projects. But I think let us also be very blunt and say, if you are an accounting officer who is running a project and you have read for 6 years, 6 years, we are running for 6 years, for heaven's sake, be thrown out, and the incompetent one be brought on board. And I'm very sure the minister would definitely agree with me on that. Secondly, my advice to the government is cut on this uncontrollable appetite to spend. There are certain things you look.
Can you explain that to our viewer? Uncontrollable appetite to spend on whose part?
Okay.
Government parts, or is it
government
generally, or is it within the docket of Honorable Bahati?
He's the Minister of Finance. I mean, of course, most of the things, I mean, he's not the one spending the money, but the pressures from other sectors.
True.
I heard today, that we are debating to buy radios for the whole country, and that's because of COVID. I think maybe you can debate whether we need those radios or not. We can argue we spent some money on buying hose. I mean, really hose in this 21st century. We can debate about whether we need to buy to buy hose in this country. So many things of similar nature would be there. But also, considering the fact that you don't have, your revenues are not catching up with the expenditure, what are those things that are actually very important that we can postpone and say, for this time around, these could be our key priorities that we need to focus on and postpone the rest to another financial year. So my third element would be on revenue. I think revenue, we are doing well, but there is still room for expansion. Despite the fact that our tax to GDP is currently around 14%, I think.
13.7, around 13.7, 14.
But we have a potential to 22. And there are very low-hanging fruits. And I think the current leadership has shown that actually with integrity and the commitment, if you remove corruption, you can pick more. Just imagine when you talk of rentals, you are sampling a few villages in Kampala. Everybody, this country, each and every urban center has got rentals. Why don't we invest the money to make sure that money returns back? Look at when they say invoices, you are looking at supermarkets in Kampala. But the supermarket in Chisoro, in Koboko, in Busia, they trade in the same goods and services that are here in Kampala, and almost the same prices. So why don't we cover the whole country? Coordination among the ministries. How many, I mean, why don't we ensure that at the Lands Ministry, at the Immigration, in the Ministry of Finance, these where the government services are, URA is quickly and able to tap into it. But I'm telling you, for a government agency to tap into another, it's also another battle. So these are some of the political decisions I think our decision makers should quickly be able to make that. That would definitely be able to reduce our debt burden. The other important element I think for me we need to understand is that we talked about debt refinancing, and it's a problem. Debt refinancing is whereby you have not been able to pay this time around your commitment. You roll it over next financial year. You either borrow to pay this loan and clear it off, or you negotiate, and then you negotiate with the person who gave you the money, and you tell them, I will pay you next year. That would not be a problem from a business perspective. But then if your refinancing is increasing from 5 trillion to 6 trillion, you're projecting it to be 7 trillion, you're in problems. So when you begin to get those kind if you get that kind of a picture, then you begin to ask yourself, okay, I think the rate at which I'm borrowing, I need to be able to scrutinize my methods and be very careful on what more loans I intend to work on, and also ensuring that the loans I have I utilize very well, and I think that should be something that I would like to see my policymakers begin to ask themselves, that if this is the kind of situation we are in, what measures should we put in place to ensure that we don't add the burden more to us, but also to ensure that we correct the burden that we currently have and move forward. Thank you.
Good. Honorable Minister, good points coming from your colleagues there. And let's start from looking at some of the issues that they have raised in terms of challenges. One of them being uncontrollable appetite to spend. Do you think that as a government, and you are the man who knows the deep end of the pocket of government, that we spend too much more than we actually make, especially in the current circumstance caused by COVID-19?
Well, I think we need to look at it from where is this money that we are borrowing going. Almost 85% is going into infrastructure.
Infrastructure,
85% is going into infrastructure. And why are we investing more in infrastructure than anything else? These are things that we think can actually grow the economy. For example, you need power to support industrialization. That's why you see we have invested in Karuma, because you need power. Karuma and Simba, you need power to grow the economy. Manufacturers will need power to set up factories. We're investing in roads because we think they can also reduce the cost of transportation and facilitate production across the country. We'll be soon coming to invest in the standard gauge railway, which I think is very key in reducing the cost of transportation. So the big portion of the money that we are borrowing is actually going into infrastructure. And as you know, Charis, soon, probably in 5 years or less, we'll be getting now revenue from our oil. So the moment we start getting revenue from our oil, the moment we start implementing reforms on the revenue side, for example, what Julius was talking about, the rentals, the digital stamps for manufacturing, when we raise our revenue and have this revenue from the oil, we will get space now to finance things using our own resources. It is true there is indeed appetite for the good services the NRM government is giving by the population of Uganda. When the president moves to Nebi or Kabale, people want good roads. When people want schools, people want hospitals, and it's a duty of government to provide these hospitals. So we balance between the priorities that we have set ourselves to achieve and also the borrowing that we are carrying out. So it's not that we are just spending, appetite to spend. We are spending to finance the priorities, and these priorities are to develop our country. We are not just spending, but we are spending to finance the priorities that develop our country. Now there's the issue of refinancing. It's true that we inherited some close now to 6 trillion, which we borrow every year to pay so that we can be able to have some space to move forward. But we're having a plan, a financing plan to restructure this refinancing in terms of getting external sources to restructure it for a longer period so that we can reduce on the cost of domestic borrowing, because Charles, as you know, while external borrowing pays lesser interest, but external domestic borrowing is a bit expensive. So that's why you see that external borrowing is actually more than the domestic borrowing, because we are trying to minimize the cost of domestic borrowing. But as a country, Muhomuza said we should not just look at the GDP, the debt to GDP. Yes, it is true we are not looking at that, and we should not compare ourselves to Japan and others. But I also wanted, Charles, if you may, try to compare how we are doing with other countries, especially in our region. Uganda, as I told you, is now at 41%. But you may say, don't compare yourselves with countries like what I'm going to mention. But Burundi is now at 64% of GDP. Kenya is at 65%. Rwanda is at 58.5%. Gambia 81%. UK 86%. France 99%. USA 138%. The point that I'm demonstrating here is that we are cautious as we take on these loans. Yes, there has been a rapid increase in the last 3 years because we must sort out this infrastructure development. We had to do something with one of the things that we had to invest was to invest in the oil, the infrastructure for oil. All those roads had to be done to prepare for the production of oil. You had to invest in Kabale International Airport, to borrow money to develop Kabale International Airport, because you had to prepare in advance for you to start the production of oil. So our readiness for this important, the extraction of this important resource was very important. Those are some of the things that actually increased the cost of, the rapidly increased the investment, rather the borrowing. that we have had in the last 3 years. But nevertheless, we are still sustainable, because at the end of the day, is your borrowing sustainable? Can you be able to pay back what you have borrowed and pay it at a time when it's needed? Uganda, for the last 30 years, after the HIPIC, when we were forgiven the debt,
2006?
2006, Uganda has never defaulted, even for once. Even for once. We have never defaulted on paying back the loans that we have borrowed. So our loan is sustainable. What we are trying now to do is to ensure that we actually implement the projects and implement them on time and even ahead of time, so that we realize the growth that we need and develop the people of Uganda.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. You mentioned yourself the five major challenges, including preparedness. Preparedness, sometimes the counterpart funding is not ready, but you decide to borrow. The issue of, leave alone the issue of compensation, there is the issue of management of the projects, approvals and all that. Don't you think that some of our the growing debts are actually caused, and their lack of viability, as some experts say, that are actually caused by our own ineptitude, other than really what other countries like Kenya or maybe even the Japan you're mentioning, face?
Yeah, I must mention something about the impression. The impression that we are over-borrowing, which has been brought by the constitutional arrangement that we have. While in Kenya, when the executive wants to borrow, they will go to Parliament and ask Parliament to give them permission to borrow a certain amount of money once a year.
Yes.
So
I thought we also have that cap.
So we go to Parliament ourselves and say, our budget is this much. Out of this, the domestic revenue will finance this much, and the external borrowing will finance this much. And Parliament appropriates that. But the Constitution requires us that for every project, we have got to go back. So when we go back during the financial year, after actually Parliament has given us that sitting within the year, within the budget appropriation, then people get the impression that actually we are over-borrowing. You keep seeing, because the Constitution requires us that every project
we must go back and ask for parliamentary approval.
For parliamentary approval. So that's one of the things that we need to look at. But we have also put reforms in place to address some of the challenges that I've mentioned. For example, the issue of preparedness. Now we put a development committee in the Ministry of Finance. No project will be financed without passing through the development committee. No project will be financed or processed without the consent and approval of His Excellency the President. So the coordination of the financing of these projects and projects to finance has been put in place. We have also now working, and I want to thank the Committee of National Economy. They have also put criteria. If you go to Parliament without counterpart funding, the project will not pass. So when you see what has happened in the last 3 years, actually, we have improved. Even the absorption capacity has improved tremendously. So we think that actually the worst is behind us at the moment.
Okay. Let me bring in Margaret Muhanga. She is a legislator, so she should swing in to help us understand from parliamentary perspective whether they are doing whether Parliament is doing its oversight work well as far as checking government in quote-unquote excessive borrowing. Mr. Mukunda has said excessive appetite to spend. Honorable Margaret, tell us, are you as MPs or as Parliament doing your bit to check government over borrowing and causing a lot of debt stress on Ugandan taxpayers?
I think, Charles, we could be better the whole thing wrong. Because if you borrow, it means you have the capacity to pay. Because nobody will lend you money when you have no capacity to pay. For me, my problem is not on borrowing, because Uganda's economy has been growing at least 5% average per annum. Bigger economies, like the biggest economy in the world, the USA, has been growing at 2% per annum for the last so many years. Now, that means Uganda is growing faster, right? So when we borrow and use this money correctly,
not necessarily,
should be our problem. Because for me, my biggest problem is government overspending. Government is not frugal at all. We spend too much money on non-essentials at some times.
Like what?
Because if you look at, let me talk about at least a few things. Construction. The government of Uganda, if you compare with other governments in the region, uses more money to make a kilometer of a road. Look at schools. If somebody is building a private school, because these are things that we have evaluated as parliament, a person uses an average of between 28 and 35 million for one classroom. At the district level, the bidders will put one classroom at about 90 million. That's more than a half, almost 3 times more than what a private individual constructing their own school would use. Now, when it comes to the central government, it even moves higher. I am just giving a random analysis. I am not quoting exactly what they use, but for the private individuals, private schools, somebody uses between 28 and 35 million. Government will use 3 times more than that. And at the local government, they use much less. At the center, they use more. Now, the excuse they keep giving us whenever we try to inquire is that the construction companies borrow money, which should not be government's problem. Government takes longer to pay them. Then there is withholding tax and other taxes. But even if you compound all this and even delays, it doesn't come to the amount that the government uses. So government needs to be frugal, stop expenditures. The second line of expenditures in government are government vehicles or machinery. The expense the government goes through to simply repair tractors, lorries, any car that belongs to the government is just too high. Imagine that there's a time when we were in PACOB meetings, Presidential Advisory Committee on Budget, and somebody raised an issue. I remember it was Honorable Amos Lugolobi, the chairperson of the Committee on Budget, and questioned why, if a district is given a tractor from the government, it does not serve the purpose and then it is down in a very short time. But an individual has got their own tractor, bought at the same time with the one of government, and is well maintained for a longer time than anything that belongs to government. So the question is with our people: overspending, high corruption, and also not being able to use government resources in a better manner. The waste is too much. There is a person who told me, one of the cadres that was posted somewhere to work as a permanent secretary, and one day these office messengers brought her an invoice to sign that they were purchasing, I think, staples. Yeah, staples. But the money was it was in billions. She said, are these staples for the whole country or only for this ministry? That they were for only that ministry. And she said, I will not sign here. So a lot of people find that so easy, they sign. And you know, it's a chain. Somebody signs, the other one purchases, but everybody knows that we shall not purchase what we have signed for, and we have all agreed on our card. That is where the biggest problem is. Then the other issue, maybe we can raise an issue of broadening our tax base, because a lot of things are not taxed, and a lot of us wouldn't want to pay tax anyway. And this is something all over the world. No one wants to pay tax. But then there's a lot of informal sector. Our economy has a lot of people in the informal sector, and we need to find them to tax them. Rentals, we need to follow them up and tax them. And I think it's something which is giving you a headache. We are not getting these rental people very well. Then maybe the other problems are actually in the management of these resources that we borrow. And the other is about us citizens. I remember when the construction of Fort Portocam, when the road was ongoing, some villager asked government for a heap of money for just about quarter an acre into his land or something like that. And yet, the amount of money paid for an acre of land in that area is none. The man puts his feet down, and because we have given everybody liberty to do whatever they want, government could not pass the land, the road into his land, and they had to divert this road, incur more costs, but just to have peace with its citizens. So the citizens have become bigger than the government, and that's also a problem.
Okay.
You see, I wanted to tell you about so many other countries that borrow so highly, but I saw the minister explaining this very well. Some are going up at over 100% their GDP, and we are still much below our GDP. And yet our economy is growing well. Even with COVID, our economy has been resilient. We need to look at what other economies in the world have done to grow. There is what they call patriotism. The citizens of most rich countries are not as rich. People live an average life on basics on which to survive. Someone pays for their house for over 30 years, professors, what? But it's not it's not the kind of thing that happens here. Some people are richer than even the institutions they are working for. Some of these people do not even have a kiosk where they earn this extra income, but they are civil servants and extremely wealthy. But when we are going to look at corruption and what everybody points a finger at a minister or some people in the political circles, and yet these people do not sign any vote, do not sign on any checks. And we forget the accountancy ministries, we forget the auditors that have a clique where money rotates. And I don't know when the whip will be moved to these people. I see Afande Nakalema trying, but she has not reached the core people that Ugandans know. And lastly, once we weed out corruption, we stop government wastage, where a cow of government is repaired at the cost of buying another in a spate of 1 year. Very unreasonable things, but they are passed through very tight systems because the system is such that everybody is dealing with the other to have their cut. So there is, and they tick every I and they cross every T. And there is nowhere you will find an error. And then you can't catch these thieves. You can only know by what they are doing outside their work. There is one top leader in Uganda who noted that a lot of private people working in government are amassing wealth while our schools are rotting away and our hospitals are getting dilapidated. Most of the government, whenever you see a rotten house, you don't even ask that's a government house. Why? Why are people's houses looking very beautiful and government houses are looking ugly? And these are the same people who work with the government. So we need to look inward, not outward. We need to look at our own problems as citizens.
Okay.
Because these people who work in these areas are our children, our brothers and sisters. Because somebody can earn an honest living. We need basics on which to live. We don't need skyscrapers, super highways to own everything in the world, but to own the basics on which to survive. To have a roof on top of your head, pay fees for your children, and that's it.
Okay.
But if you want to own the world and then steal the money from government and make private investments, it is what we need to look at right now. There is a law that we enacted in the 8th Parliament.
Honorable Margaret.
Which is called illicit enrichment.
Honorable Margaret, good points there. I need to call for a break right now. You have raised very important issues: broadening the tax base, the wastage, the pilferage, the collusion, corruption generally. Those are very important points that we must touch on when we come back from the break. But let's take that break now.
COVID-19 is a disease caused by the new coronavirus. Know the symptoms. They include fever, coughing, muscle pain, shortness of breath. What can you do? Wash your hands frequently with soap and water for 20 seconds or use an alcohol-based hand rub. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. When coughing or sneezing, cover your mouth with a tissue or flexed elbow. Discard tissues into a closed bin and then wash your hands. Maintain a distance of at least 1 meter between yourself and someone who is ill. Seek medical help if you display symptoms. Wear a mask if you are coughing or sneezing, or if you are caring for someone who is sick. Dispose of your masks into a closed bin and then wash your hands. Check trusted sources regularly for accurate information. Remember, the best prevention is to keep yourself healthy and follow these safe steps.
Omwezi guno gw'Okitoba, abazadde n'abakuza b'abaana mwenna mu ggwanga mujjukizibwa okutwala abaana bammwe abali wansi w'emyaka 15 ku ddwaliro ekuli okumpi oba awagenerwa abaana ku kyalo kyo mu kaweefube okubatangira endwadde zennamutta omuli obukusense, ekikutiya, poliyo, mulalama, akafuba, lubyamira, okuddukana n'endwadde endala. Abaana bano bakuweebwa ekirungo kya vitamin A okubayamba okwetangira endwadde ng'olukusense, ekiddukano n'omusujja wamu n'okukuuma amaaso gaabwe nga balamu. Abaana abawala ab'emyaka 10 ne 11 bakuweebwa eddagala lya HPV okubawulira okukwatibwa kw'okuluwummula gwa nnabaana. Eddagala ly'okugema lyesigika, likola bulungi ng'ate lya bwereere. Ojjukizibwa okuteeka mu nkuba ebiragiro bya minisitule y'ebyobulamu eby'okwetangira ekirwadde kya COVID-19 omuli okwambala masiki nga tuli waka, okunaaba mu ngalo ne sabbuuni wamu n'okwewa ebbanga lya mita 2 okuva ku muntu akuliraanye. Omwana omulamu, amaka amasanyufu. Obubaka buno bukuleeteddwa minisitule y'ebyobulamu ng'ewagiddwa ekitongole kya UNICEF, WHO, Earth ne banywanyi ba.
It's a full-time job to be a great parent or guardian. The decisions we make impact their lives forever. And getting a birth certificate is one of the most important ones. All you need to do is get a birth notification record stamped by a medical officer from the hospital where the baby was born or from the sub-county chief in case it occurred at home. Go to the nearer offices in your area and present the notification record, copy of parent's ID and bank payment slip of 5,000 Ugandan shillings for citizens and $40 for non-citizens. Fill NERA Form 3 while there, and a birth certificate will be issued to you. Please note that birth certificates to refugees born in Uganda are free of charge. For more information, visit the NERA office closest to you or call 0800-211-700. This message is brought to you by NERA.
Welcome back from that break. This is Behind the Headlines, and let me say that if you want to join the debate online, the hashtag is hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. Hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines is the hashtag you can use to join this discussion. But we are also live on Facebook. We are on UBC TV, that's on Facebook. We are also broadcasting through YouTube via UBC Television Uganda. YouTube via UBC Television Uganda. The topic that we are discussing is the Uganda's public debt. Is there value for the borrowed money that that has exponentially increased, especially within the last about 3-5 years, and most especially after 2006, when the heavily indebted countries initiative saw Uganda being pardoned of its debts. I think it was 4 trillion shillings that time, which was excused. In the studio we have the Honorable David Bahati, is Minister for Finance in charge of planning. He is also MP for Ndorwa County West in Kabale. We have Mr. Julius Mukunda, we have who is the Executive Director of CS BAG. We have Dr. Fred Muhumuza, he teaches economics at Makerere University. We have been joined by Mr. Ramadan Gobi, who teaches economics at MUBS. Online, through Zoom, we have Honorable Margaret Muhanga, who is joining us all the way from Fort Portal City. Before we went into the break, Margaret raised a number of issues, and I think we need to tackle them. Some of them were raised earlier, but we need to tackle them in this second segment. Dr. Muhumuza, two questions I need you to respond to. The comparisons are coming through. The Honorable David first raised it, but Honorable Margaret has also added her voice to it. Can we be strong enough to argue that the US has borrowed maybe up to 81%, Kenya has 68%, and Uganda only 41%? Is that a fair enough argument? And why must we have that argument in economic terms? Make us understand that. But also, two, the question of broadening the tax base. Our tax to GDP ratio is only 13.7% or 14%. Julia said it has potential to grow up to 22%. What is failing it in the current management of our economy?
Thank you, Charles. I'll begin with the ratios. The ratios must make sense to the subject matter. Comparing a debt to your GDP, as earlier on you said, people are losing buildings worth billions. Possibly a building can be 100 billion. You fail to pay 1 billion, the bank will sell your building. Now, if you are to really look at your debt to the value of the building, it is 1%. But you have failed to raise money. They are going to sell it. So what we use is a liquidity indicator to say how much of your tax revenue is going into debt service. Now, in Uganda, if you only look at interest payment for this year is in excess of 4 trillion. Interest payment alone. With the other, as we said, we're just going to roll it over, even when it matures. But what is our tax collection for this year? We are literally expecting about 19 trillion. Meaning, if you look at what portion of your tax revenues is going into just interest payment, that is 21%. Now, that is the more relevant indicator of the money that I have, how much has gone away. That even after raising taxes, I'm unable to deliver services because of my past sins. Now, the target we have as a country is supposed to be 15% if you are to be sustainable. And these are the indicators we really want to use to, when we are talking about debt sustainability. If you are using 15% maximum of your tax revenue to deal with your debt, you can talk of sustainability. We are at 21%. Now, at 21%, globally, that country is debt stressed. So whether we like it or not, Uganda is in the category of debt stressed countries. And that should be serious, and I think we need to put it down. Now, can we increase our revenue? And what did the debt do? Because as we said earlier, the debt is supposed to give our country ability to produce. Now, we have invested in energy. Thank God you can talk of Karuma, you can talk of Wisimba. I don't know where else these things are. There are so many of them. But we have capacity to generate 1,200 megawatts. We only have capacity to consume about 600. So in the process, we have, even what that we are consuming is too expensive to make our companies viable. Remember, these are the ones that pay taxes. But on their own, they are unable to pay, and yet our investment in energy was to make them competitive. They have asked for subsidies, they are not using the power, then you end up with dead stock in your economy, and you are headed for disaster. Honorable Minister knows very well, we are paying for what we call deemed power. People who have already produced power on our request, and we are not using it, and they are saying, well, that's not my problem. So pay for the power that you are not using. I think the last figures I saw, we spent $18 million last year alone for deemed power. Now, you really, something is wrong. And you therefore cannot generate that private sector which is supposed to pay your taxes. Because it is one thing for people to say, rental income, rental income. Every time I'm driving around, I look at finished bungalows, apartments, without people in them. Remember, rental income is tax on that income from rent. If this house is empty, you have no rental income. No matter how much you invest, this man is not earning money, this woman is not earning money. So we need to get back to how do we make the economy productive. And let me ask for my 3 slides here to illustrate my point, if they can actually be shown easily. Because we need to remove the politics out of these discussions.
There it is.
Look at that slide. That is how fast we have borrowed. And these figures are supposed to be monthly. Net credit to government. This is only commercial banks' money we have been sucking out of the commercial banks. Honorable Minister quite often says I left these policies around. I left around 2014. If you really check, by that time we are still even saving on the banking system. But since I left, I don't know what has happened. There is another slide there, which is really showing us the figures of, you can even move to, of how much of our debt, of our budget, is going into debt service. Meaning it's not even available to help you pay your NEB registration, but it is part of your 45 trillion. But it's not available to deliver any service. In economics, we call that a straitjacket.
A straitjacket.
You cannot turn, you can't, you have lost your degrees of freedom. You are like on a one-way road, and there is jam, you can't get out of it. Just switch off your engine and relax. It's a very bad way to budget that way. The last slide, please. Now, if you look at the last one, and these are the figures, as I said, the Honorable Minister, they have these figures, these are Minister of Finance figures. But I don't think they generated the necessary information, as I said, to give to him to have a conversation with his political colleagues. Because these are politically taken decisions.
Yes, are you saying that these are figures you get from the technical desk, but you are saying that you suspect the minister is not given them.
Even if he gets them, a figure is a figure. I can go to a hospital and tell you my temperature is 38. What does that say to me? It will take a doctor to say you are out of range. You should have been below 37.
The analysis.
Point this. So that information is what the minister would need. So, but for them, they will be given one thing, debt to GDP. But this is what is killing you. If you looked at that last table we have seen, last year alone, we borrowed about 8.5 trillion.
Maybe the minister, you can move on, but the minister wants to give you information. You can take it.
Which is okay, but let me first finish this. We borrowed 8.5 trillion. 6 was debt refinancing. Meaning that the more we borrow, we don't even have that money to help us test for COVID. And yet that is a need. So you are borrowing more, but actually you are unable to deliver any service. And the earlier borrowing I said, which is crippling the government, the financial institutions, is actually now undermining the very objective. Because the private sector can no longer go to the banks and borrow. It has been crowded out. And yet it is the private sector that is supposed to give value to the power investment, to the road investment. So we are saying, can we have a candid discussion on that balance? Because the government thinks it is the only one in the market. And then it is expecting private sector to pay the taxes and employ people and generate exports. Then I think we are tying our legs and then saying, let's go and run. That for me is really not good economics.
Honorable Minister, you want to respond?
Yes.
Mr. Mukunda also wants to. I want to bring in Ramadan Gobi, but it's okay. Honorable Minister, information.
Yeah, 2 points. I always joke with Dr. Mumza that, you know, he worked at the Ministry of Finance for 8 years.
Very important information.
And most of these things, he left them there. And I've always invited him to come back.
You're actually, so you are implementing his policy.
But what is important is,
yes, it's important.
Dr. Mumza, we get all the figures. So make no mistake to say that we don't get all the figures. We know the liquidity ratios, we know all these ratios. One point I want us to really clear, and which has been a huge debate in some of the discussions that we have had with these experts, is the issue of excess energy that we have.
That we produce.
That we produce.
And that we are projecting to produce.
Yes. I think Muhammad and his group, the group that think alike, would want that you produce the energy that you are able,
that is able to be consumed.
Our approach is that we should produce the energy that it is ready to attract investments to grow the economy.
Even if there is surplus.
I want to give you an example. We have excess energy now, but it is temporary. One factory alone, as the president and everybody has known, for example, the one in Tororo, takes over 200 megawatts. What is excess now? So should we wait for the factory to come and then we start constructing a dam, which takes 3 years? Or should we have power which follows which? Because the factories will follow energy, will follow power if power is there, but power will not follow the factories. So our approach is, yes, we cannot balance it now, but when we have sufficient energy now, we are able to attract investments, and these investments will grow the economy. Okay. So in the short run, you are going to have some temporary imbalance, but it's not going. But it's a necessary evil to have excess power at the moment. Actually, it's not even. It's a necessary issue that we should do.
As they say, it is a good problem.
It's a good problem. It's a good problem to have power now than if not having power. You have companies come, but they cannot find power to produce. Okay. They run away. They will not wait for you, Muhammad.
Fair enough.
And I think this argument really, Muhammad should get out of our minds. We should clear it properly. Because you know we are attracting investments. These investments, when they come here, they will need power. When a company comes, it's not going to wait for you for 3 years for you to construct it.
While you're constructing.
Yeah. Let me just make
Doctor, is that a good argument?
No, it is not.
Is a fair?
It is not.
It's not fair?
Because we do projections of power supply and power demand. Now you realize the supply, you don't realize the demand. You should be concerned. Why are you not realizing the demand? Because you have borrowed to do other things from the very sources where the private sector that is supposed to use the power was supposed to go and borrow. Now before you even look at the new investors coming into the country, the current ones are dying. And that's my point, because the whole generation of this power was to lower the tariff cost and make it competitive and attractive. Now if the current ones are dying, don't expect new ones. So I think that is the whole point of the argument.
Okay.
And now you are paying for power you are not using.
What do you mean they're dying?
The companies are closing, they are operating at 30% capacity. So how do you expect a new company to come when the current ones have not even reached their capacity and they're asking you, Minister, for subsidies? Because the tariff is high.
No, but surely, as you know, Charis,
yes,
we have made a decision that for all manufacturing companies, they should have power at 5 cents. That's the policy that we made. And also Dr. Muhumuza is aware of the massive factories that have been opening in these industrial
But does Omeme follow that, Honorable Minister?
No, we had some challenge at some stage, but that has now been resolved. All factories must access the power at 5 cents.
I think the point is, what is the unit cost? Because now you are subsidizing the very factories. Who is paying that subsidy is the problem. You are going to borrow to subsidize companies, yet you borrowed to generate electricity for them to survive. I think that's where the economics is. We can talk the politics, we can talk the economics. I want to stick to the economics and leave the minister with the politics.
Or leave him with both the politics and the economics.
No, the economics has entered in my space and I really want to make some economics.
Okay, let's bring in probably a mediator on that argument, Mr. Mukunda.
I think for me is, I mean, the minister has a point. I mean, why would you want to take 3 years to develop a factory when the investor has just arrived at Entebbe Airport? I mean, you might think probably it might not make sense. But I thought it's also very important that what you are producing, that your current investors are also utilizing it, so that even the person who comes is able to say, investor X and Y are actually utilizing this particular power. But I think for me, it's the loans we get for energy. There are also other loans that we get for other different things. I think, but the challenge I had mentioned from the beginning was, for me, it's the question of, if I am starting this project and it's supposed to end in 3 years, why does it end in 20 years? So that if this investor who is coming to utilize this project knows very well that by the time I'm going to come, Uganda would have finished building this dam and evacuated this electricity from where it is to the consumers. And I think that is something I want to see the minister addressing, because we know very well that we have power that is not being evacuated. It is still at the source. Why? Because as we negotiated for the loan for the transmission lines, in the middle of it all, somebody says you can't touch my land. We also understand, there are serious cases. There are cases in court that have taken over 3 years and unresolved. And because of the question of land, I think the minister has really touched. But another citizen is going to ask himself, if they burnt a church in Endeavour and we immediately swung into action and declared that this one is for public utilization and we took it over, why would surely a transmission line be delayed for 3 years simply because somebody has said that you have disagreement on evaluation? And these disagreements that have delayed this project is simply because of corruption. Because when our valuer says that it is going to cost 1 billion, somebody goes by, no, it's supposed to cost 10 billion. If you go to court, it's going to take you 3 years. So I think we must have a standard way on how we ensure that if a project is going to pass here, even before we sign a loan, we have the right of way. I was informed of this Kampala highway, this
Entebbe Express.
Not Entebbe, the flyover.
Northern.
The flyover in Kampala. That any delay for the contractor will cost us almost 300 million per day. So you just imagine that, and then you hear that we have a problem at Centenary Park. So before we designed this project, before we started negotiating this loan, couldn't we have thought that let's first ensure that we clear the right of way? The other fundamental area that is going actually affecting our debt portfolio and loan negotiations are the conditions attached to it. Because if somebody tells you that any delay it was going to cost you 300 millions, and you very well know that in Uganda one of your biggest problems is the right of way, why would you still go ahead and sign such a contract, knowing that it's going to tie your hands and you are not going to get out? We know of conditions whereby they say, if you don't have counterfeit funding, we are not going to release money. Why don't you release money and then I can bring counterpart funding along with the way, as I also raise more revenue? So probably in terms of our negotiation, maybe we need also to build our capacity in terms of saying, okay, in Uganda, these factors actually affect implementation of project, and as such, when it comes to negotiations, we should clearly be able to protect these areas and defend them, so that we don't hold ourselves or put ourselves in a situation whereby at the end of the day the government is going to lose and the project is going to stall.
Actually say that the taxpayer is losing.
Yes, and I can tell you that as of last year, we had out of $8 billion that was supposed to have got, only 4 had come. 47% of that had been dispersed. The rest was still there, simply because we are not yet ready to start implementing the project. We have not put it in place the project management units. We don't have the right of way. There is no counterpart funding, the procurement process of the keepers. Those are the things that are really holding us in terms of ensuring that we benefit from these loans. Lastly, for me, I think the question of debt to GDP. I mean, I was when I was coming with the news, I was asking myself, so if I am going to choose countries where to live based on that criteria, and Afghanistan is at 17% debt to GDP, would I really go to Afghanistan? Or I would go to Japan, where the debt to GDP is above 200%. So again, you begin to ask yourself, maybe this could be an indicator we should not be able to push so much. Maybe we look at other indicators that can help us understand, but also in terms of debt sustainability, help us say we are able to pay, but also we are able to utilize the loans properly that we are using. Thank you.
Okay. Honorable Minister, I think you can respond to the issues after Ramadan has come in to join the discussion. Gobi, you found, I'm sure you followed the first part of the debate, but thanks that you still came in. A number of issues have been raised, broadly speaking, the issues of broadening the tax base, the issues of pilferages, collusion, corruption coming in, the management, project management affecting or, escalating our debt portfolio and all that kind of thing. And then, you found when Dr. Muhumuza had brought in another perspective in terms of the international standard for measuring debt sustainability being 15%. What is your view on the current, fast increase in our debt, the public debt that we have?
Thank you. I will start with what he has talked about, and then we come to your litany of issues. I think in graduate school they teach us of economics that whenever you are following debt, follow not a number, but the qualitative aspects of the debt. Therefore, the debt to GDP ratio is globally used, but it's not a very good indicator of measuring debt sustainability. Why? Because first of all, GDP is not a government resource. And yet government is the one to repay the debt. GDP is a national resource. So if you want to have a good indicator to use, a good parameter, use the government resource. Government resource is government revenue. So it should be GDP to revenue, I mean debt to revenue ratio, which often we call the debt burden ratio in economics. That debt burden ratio, for example, currently Japan, whose debt to GDP ratio is 244%, has a debt burden ratio of 4.3%. That of Uganda is 20%. So Uganda is in more
Stress.
debt burden than Japan. Somebody may wonder, why? What causes that? The reason is very simple. Japan has a lot of leeway to increase tax than Uganda has without hurting the economy. Japan has leeway, Uganda has limited capacity to raise more revenue by increasing tax. Also, Japan has a sovereign currency. Japan borrows in yen, so it can print the yen and pay. Uganda, you borrow
In dollars.
in a currency which is not yours. So you can't ask Minister Bahati to go and print and we pay some people. It can't happen. That is also part of the problem. Therefore, I find that Uganda will need to go back and see how do we create more fiscal space for us to be able to borrow for development. And to create that space, it comes from both the domestic revenue mobilization side, but also from controlling our expenditure on the expenditure side. I will start with the revenue mobilization. I know you have discussed it. I'm sorry I came
No, it's okay. It's
I came later and I didn't watch.
It's okay.
I was
We
just
had just
getting.
entered it in the second segment.
I was just
The issue
getting out of yes.
revenue mobilization.
As we are starting the program, I was starting my journey.
In the second which you joined.
I'm giving you account. I'm sir accounting to you that I was just getting out
Don't apologize.
of Entebbe. So the issue of domestic revenue mobilization in Uganda is a serious conversation we should have. We've been having over years the MTEF, medium term expenditure framework. We haven't been having a medium term revenue mobilization framework. When government went and made one, there is a book. It is moving around, but that book is not enforceable when you look at it. Most of the things in it were not thought through quite well. The very issues which affect us in domestic revenue, number one, is the capacity of the institution which collects tax. Has to be rebuilt. And I'm glad that now the URA is being restructured and rebuilt so that it can have capacity to collect tax. There is a lot of under-declaration in Uganda, falsification of documents. Companies are not paying tax they are supposed to be paying. That's number one. That's a reality. It has been found in several audits and in other studies. For example, one study I looked at recently found that we are losing up to 6 percentage points of our tax to GDP ratio. 6% because of under declarations and also outright evasion of tax, especially VAT. That's why you see when the government introduced now the digital stamps, there was a lot of noise in private sector. How, you know, this is going to kill business, going to kill the economy and so on. because they are not used to paying tax. We have the weak administration also and corruption in the system. You find that they make a mistake. They are retiring. They have been, I heard that from the current Commissioner General that they are changing this. They have been sending home very young taxmen, assistant commissioners, retiring them after serving. You know, they have their laws there. You serve twice, you go. So these people, they retire, they go to the private sector, and they teach the private sector all the loopholes in the system which should be used to avoid tax. This is a reality. We also have auditors in the URA who have not been well trained in the audits they are going to make. So the firms are on another level than them. Also, URA does not share information with the sister authorities elsewhere. So when an importer, for example, is importing from Japan a coil to come and make a steel, they underdeclare them. You find that a coil which is already a finished product, they declare it as the raw material. They pay 10% instead of paying 25%, and so on and so forth. So all of these need to be addressed. All that said, there is an issue which I found the two, Honorable Bahati and Dr. Muhumuza, debating something they have been debating over years, and they have failed to agree. They debated when they were both in the Ministry of Finance. They are still debating this issue of excess power. I want to comment on it briefly. You know, now Uganda, we have about 37 factories, 37, which are consuming more power than all the domestic consumers, 1.56 million households. Only 37 factories. What does that teach you? That actually this so-called excess demand we are talking about, I mean excess supply of power, can be wiped out if we could do,
if we got only 50.
Just to get about 50 of that type.
That magnitude.
Yes, large to extra large factories. They can wipe out all that power in no time, and we shall need more dams. But the challenge was in negotiation of these dams, the way they negotiated them. You know, Uganda, we have a problem also of corruption and internal trading. The people whom we entrust with the responsibility to bargain on behalf of Uganda, they haven't been doing a very good job. They bargained things. If I were the president, I would have court-martialed them. And they have been making it so difficult for us to actually withstand the pressure from the private sector to make money from government. So I know that Dr. Fred feels terrible when he sees every year over 60 billion being paid for what they call deemed power, because of someone who negotiated a dam, who built it, but now that dam was negotiated in a bad way that wherever you are using the power, not you are going to pay. You know, it's like somebody was tying our neck. We need electricity, but we are paying it expensively. But that electricity, I would want to tell Dr. Muhumuza that we need it. It's not that we want it. And that's why the Honorable Bahati is correct to say that the electricity will not wait. I always tell him, I ask him, Dr. Muhumuza, what comes first between the chicken and the egg? No, you know the answer he tells me? That in Uganda we don't have the chicken. We only have the egg. That we must keep the egg. But you know, these are realities. We need this electricity for us to be able to build the economy. Lastly, we need to ask ourselves, how do we spend this money we borrow? It's a very critical question. How do we spend? Project implementation in Uganda is actually from project design. It's a very big problem. The project managers design projects to benefit themselves, not the people. And this is what Ugandans need and parliamentarians need actually to discuss. How do we conceive projects? How do we design them? How do we execute them? This is where the problem is. It's not about the borrowing. Uganda has not overborrowed. No, we haven't overborrowed. We have borrowed very little money. Countries have borrowed money, my dear. A lot of money. But because they invest it well in things which are going to return money, they go beyond just NPVs, they go into economic analysis of these projects. And they are able to tell with almost utmost kind of certainty that this money will be paid back around this period. In Uganda, we are like borrowing for chance. I mean, we are borrowing and invest for chance. We say, God willing, we might get back the money or not. That's where the problem is.
Okay. Honorable Minister, you have a full plate to respond to some of the issues that they raised, but also you need to touch on the quality and efficiency of execution from some of the issues that have been raised, including what he has just raised. And then someone called Alfred says, is also asking on corruption, given the glaring corruption and pilferage in government, what assurance do you have, Honorable Minister, that the high appetite for borrowing is not to feed the corruption appetite? That you need to respond to that as well as you respond to the issues that they raised. And then he has also touched on similar things that Honorable Margaret touched on, under declaration and then falsification and outright evasion of tax. And then Honorable Margaret also raised the issue of some projects taking a lot more money than ordinarily should be. I have someone called Henry who has sent with the example and saying Entebbe Express Highway, for example, a kilometer costs 23 billion. I don't know whether that figure is correct, but just to express the fact that the figure was so high. And an RDC who I will not name has just sent a message and said, we repair our vehicles at 800,000 and yet when it is private, the same type of repair costs 200,000. Again, expressing the kind of excessive costings that government is usually charged. So respond to some of those issues, Honorable Minister, first, and then we can go to other parts of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charis, and I want to thank my colleagues for contributing to this important debate. Want to start with the issue of the tax base. We have put in place a tax mobilization strategy, mid-term tax mobilization strategy. Dr. Gobi could have some issues with it, but it is not, you can't say that it's 100% not necessary. There are areas which are clearly very good, and issues that we have actually been raising. One of the things that we are looking at is the issue of system integration. Somebody when you register your company, URA should be able to see that the company has been registered, and start from the word go monitoring. When you have an identity card, these systems should speak to each other. So that's one area that we think can actually widen the base. There is the issue of informality. People are doing business, they are not keeping records, nobody knows, and I think now it stands at 40%. It's an issue that we are working on to make sure that people who are doing business are supported to move from the informality to formality, so that now government can be able to get some tax out of them. Then the issue of tax education. to tell citizens that actually taxation is not a punishment. It's a citizen duty to make a contribution to your country. It's not a punishment. So we are also looking at the issues of tax education. Then there are key reforms that we have, both administration and also the new one that we have been talking about. And before we came in were issues of tax digital stamps, which are, when you look at the returns now we are getting, actually there's a lot of improvement in tax collection, and because of that, issues of rentals, which we are putting systems in place to make sure that we handle. Then there are those the gaps that are already in what Gobi and others have talked about, issues of corruption, changing of codes and all that, and that's the reason why His Excellency the President, now we hope that with the new leadership now at the helm of URA by John Musinguzi, could also help us to fight that cancer that has started eating up the institution. So and also restructuring to make sure that the systems are working. So we think really there are good policies and good reforms in this new tax mobilization strategy that can help us widen the base of our economy. But most importantly, taxes are going to be collected from businesses and from people. But when people have money, when people make money, then they spend, and when they spend, they pay tax. That's why we want to focus on making sure that we get the 68.9% households who are in subsistence economy to the money economy. Because when these households, 68% out of 9, that's close to over 5 million households in Uganda, are in subsistence. They don't have enough resources, they don't make money to be able to contribute towards the national economy. So that's why you see things like a Myoga that we are supporting, things that and recently Charles, we invested 260 billion to support these groups, 50 million in microfinance to support this. So all these initiatives to be able to support these households which are in subsistence economy will actually help us help the population make more money. And when you make money, you buy a matchbox, you buy a pen, you buy something, and on this matchbox, government has put something small to be able to contribute to the treasury. So we are focusing on these reforms in this strategy, and I will have a discussion in the coming weeks with Gobi and others about this strategy so that we can understand it together, and then if there are any areas we need to improve, we'll be able to improve. But we think it's a good real strategy. If it can be implemented in the next 2 years, we'll be able to widen our tax base. The issue of projects, yes, there are projects, as I said at the beginning, which are not doing well. But Gobi, not 100%, all the projects are not doing well, are not important. If you look at projects like Karuma, if you look at projects like Mulago that I've mentioned a few minutes ago, these are projects that are actually making a difference. I didn't, if you look at the borrowed money that we have invested in the sector of health, you look at the infant mortality rate that has reduced, the maternal mortality rate has also reduced, the life expectancy. Imagine, in just 20 years, we have moved from 41% to rather 41 years life expectancy to 63.3 years in a single generation by 20 years. It's an improvement, and all these investments are having dividends. They are yielding something to the well-being of Ugandans. Corruption, as Margaret said, I think Margaret is the one who raised that issue. We have always said it is a responsibility not only of government, but all citizens of the country to fight corruption. All of us must be patriotic, and it begins from the household. The way you train, the values you give your children, the way you train your children is going to impact on how they are going to behave when they get into the workplace. But we are putting in place systems that are working. If you look at the IGG, look at all the system, the Lieutenant Colonel Nakalema's work, the Auditor General, but also that we know the systemic one, the one that is embedded in the system, is also something that we are trying to fight. But it is clearly important to note that our debt is sustainable. Yes, you might criticize this ratio of GDP, of debt to GDP, but we must begin somewhere. And as I said, we have all these indicators. We look at these ratios. We look at the liquidity ratios. We look at the debt to GDP ratios, and when you put everything in play, our debt is sustainable. Where areas that we have to improve on are implementation level. Okay. The implementation is where we have got to work on, and that's why we're actually now starting to bite. That when you get this money, don't spend. Why should a project like Karuma take, for example, 2.5 years to procure? Yeah. Because somebody, a proxy, was tipped or has been flaunted to make an administrative review, an important project like this, and you allow 2 years, 2.5, through procurement, and we have a national development plan of 5 years, 2.5, and this project is a key project in the national development plan, but you take 2.5 years to procure it. That's why we had to bring now the amendment to the Public Procurement Act, which we are still finalizing, because the President returned it to the House because of one or two clauses. But we think that the reforms we put in place, reduction of administrative review, the need to have a regulation on the law to cap the period of procurement. We must agree that when you start a procurement today, you know when it will end. But as we speak, it has been an endless. You can even take a procurement for 10 years. Okay. There was a load in Kanungu. We borrowed the money, and it took almost 8 years. You have borrowed the money, but because of procurement. So these are impediments that actually government is working on. But Charis, it's important to note that the money that we are borrowing is actually making a difference in the lives of Ugandans, and we hope that when we increase our tax revenue, when time comes, which is not very far, we start getting money from our oil, we would be able to finance our budget in a better way.
Someone called Tinker Simire is saying, I think the high appetite to spend revolves around the unnecessary administrative costs created by mushrooming districts and the humongous parliament. Not to mention the unnecessary security to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who call themselves honorable, and the list goes on. Then he says, a system where civil servants are the richest and own the high-end buildings is a broken system. And not to mention the biggest ranches that civil servants. And Honorable Margaret talked about that. But if you talk about administrative costs, like he has mentioned, someone called Ntege Asimwe from Bushenyi says that Honorable Margaret is right to mention and talk about the issue of corruption, but she is forgetting that if MPs set themselves 50 million shillings per month, that is also part of the corruption. And then someone says, why don't we discuss also value for money? Of course, this is what we have been discussing, sir. But he says that what happens to, for example, roads where you borrow to pay back in 30 years, but the road get destroyed in 5-10 years. This for me is at my heart. Honorable Minister, I think you launched, the President commissioned about 15 years ago, the Karuma Pakwach Road. But if you look at it now, it is in a terrible state. I passed there this week on Monday, on Sunday. It's like a river flowing in a highway. And the question then, if you relate it to the debt that we are serving, the question then becomes, in terms of the quality of work, in terms of the efficiency of work, you have borrowed, let's say, 10 billion to do a road. And you're supposed, the taxpayer is supposed to pay it in 20 to 30 years. But the road gets spoiled. It's like you borrowed to buy a car, and the car got crashed. You feel like you're paying for nothing.
yeah. But Charles, that's the kind of the systemic corruption that I'm talking about. If an engineer designs a road, instead of standard A, makes it standard B, and then it goes through the process. It is very hard to it calls for patriotism, because you know, you as an individual, what you're doing is dangerous to your country. So those are some of the issues that we'll be dealing with.
Okay, we have a culture here. We are left with about 10 minutes. We have a culture here. The panelists, your hosts, usually ask the guests the questions. Honorable Margaret, can I start with you? Honorable Margaret, ask the guests. There are three guests we have. There is Julius Mukunda from civil society. There is Dr. Muhumuza from the academia at Makerere University Economics, and there is the Honorable. You can start with any of them, but ask all of them each a question.
I'll start with the Minister. I would like to ask the Honorable David Bahat, as the Minister of Planning, what mechanisms has the ministry put in place to match the resources with the population? Because Uganda has got one of the highest increase in population, that every woman has an average of 6 children. And planning for such, and it's not even population growth, fast population growth, it's explosion of numbers, which is very difficult to plan for. What mechanisms have you put in place to make sure that Uganda has got quality people, because we don't want quantity in numbers, but we want a population that has quality? Now, my question to the other two economists, actually I'll ask them one question, both of them, that if all of us put our brains together and made write-ups to the Ministry of Finance to supplement what they have been planning for this country, I think we'd get better. What I want to ask the two gentlemen, the two doctors of economics, is that you need to have some time, in your private time, I'm just requesting, sit with some of our colleagues in the Ministry of Finance, put up a write-up and say, this is what we think. Because you are a resource, a human resource to this government, in spite of where you work. And one of the things that can spur these economies are the human resource, the brains that we have everywhere. If we put them together, I am sure we can shoot for the moon and we become a star in this Great Lakes region.
Okay, the question started with the Honorable Minister. You can start responding, and then
Thank you very much, Margaret, for that wonderful question. Let me begin with the one of population. It is true that our population growth rate now stands at 3%, and one of the reasons why it's a little bit high is because of the fertility, increased fertility rate, which now stands at 5.4. Margaret is 5.4, meaning that every woman in Uganda produces 5.4 children, which is a little bit down from the 7 a few years ago, and also because of reduced mortality. The women are producing a number of children, but also there is reduction in mortality because of the good programs, good health programs were put in place, like immunization, like mosquito nets, and other good programs. What are we doing to be able to plan for this population? Actually, on Monday this week, we passed the national population policy, whose overall goal is to whose overall goal is to improve the quality of life. So one of the things that you need to see, Charles, and those of you who are watching, I did put the slide there, a pyramid of Uganda, that now we have a huge... It's there. You can see at the moment, you can see that the population of Uganda, we have a very huge population at the bottom of the pyramid. What we want to do, because now that pyramid shows that 78% of our population is below 35 years. But what we want to do is really to tilt the pyramid so that we have a big bulge of the population in the middle there who can contribute to the development of our country. How are we going to do it? We must educate these children by giving them the necessary skills. Charles, sorry, I'm using the word children because I'm starting to feel the age issue.
You're crossing the other side.
So we want that, if you can put that slide.
The second one.
The second one.
The second one.
Where we want...
Where there is a big bulge in the middle.
In the middle.
Yeah.
So we want to teach these young children, give them the necessary skills, education, put things like yoga to give them to empower them economically so that they can become the engine of economic growth. So we want the big part of it to be the middle of the working of the pyramid. Oh. So that's what we are trying to do, and we are making sure that also the plans we have are now aligned to the programs. We have developed 18 programs, and these programs must be aligned with the budget. Okay. And we are very glad that the manifesto, the NRM manifesto, is going to be launched on Monday, since it appears to me that there is a huge writing on the wall that the same president now will be the same president in a few months from now. You are going
to pay for my time, for my airtime.
We should be immediately look at the manifesto that we shall launch, so that we start beginning with this financial year incorporating all these changes. But I must conclude by saying that the resource that we have here in this talk show have actually been working with the Minister of Finance in one way or the other. We consult with them, and most of the work that comes out, they have an input, and we are very grateful.
Thank you. Dr. Muhumuza, you will respond to the issue that was raised.
That's actually to appreciate the Minister and whatever Honorable Margaret Manga has raised. We are working, we are doing our best. Conversations continue, but as I said, the politics and the economics sometimes don't blend as we would have loved, but the conversation continues. Okay. And the reason I tell my friend Gobi that we ate the chicken is because
now we have only the egg.
We only have the egg. Thank God it was fertilized. We must now make sure it hatches to create the thing. Because in economics we say when you increase supply, the price should go down. Now the excess power alone should not be allowing us to do a subsidy on the current companies. The power cost should have come down.
And I don't know why it cannot be done, because the president has always referred to the 3 bottlenecks, and electricity and its cost is number 1 that he continues.
You see, now the challenge was availability. But now the power is available, the challenge is cost. That's why we are subsidizing the factories. But we're saying with excess power, the cost should have come down. And why is it not coming down? The contracts that were made. So you have a disconnect between the power you are generating and the consumption of that power in the pricing market.
But can you push Umeme to say you are causing the country these bottlenecks, and you are the number 1 trouble? It is the number 1 trouble.
It's not a Umeme problem.
It's not a Umeme problem.
It's not a Umeme problem. Because as we said, if you are even paying for power...
Is it the whole chain?
If you are paying for power you have not evacuated, that power has not even come to Umeme. Umeme collects and hands over to those who sell on the grid. And the grid consumption and cost is structured in the loan, in the agreements.
Imagine the invigilator of exam is continuing to ask more questions.
So we have
in the middle of answering.
So we have those kinds of things. But let me also get to the other part of the economics as I end. Why do we still have 37 factories when we have excess power? And the 37 factories are performing below capacity. So even if you don't look for more factories, just make sure these which are at 40 and 60 actually go to 100. They will finish that power.
Okay.
But you have very poor households that even after the 15 billion investment, Ugandan households can't buy themselves a home, they can't buy themselves a radio. Which investor is going to come and invest in such a country where the market can't even afford it?
Mukuda, respond, because we have another question.
I just have one point I think I just wanted to make. Of course, to thank the Honorable. I think is, you know, it's usually good to hear from the policymaker, but also to be candid about the challenges that we face as a country. My one plea is for the Honorable to stop borrowing domestically, because domestic borrowing is crippling the private sector.
It's crowding them out of the market.
The 3 trillion that he is projecting to get out of this economy, really, he has the capacity actually to get multilateral loans. He has the capacity to go outside this country and get external. He has the capacity. If they could plan early, because also the contract obligation can take long, if they could plan early in January and know we need this money in December, they have the capacity. But just get out of the domestic market. I can assure you.
Why do you think government is fearing, the Honorable Bahati is fearing to borrow from outside?
I mean, of course, you go to the World Bank, and the first thing here are a few conditions. Set up this, set up that, and it takes long for it to come out. And yet, the interest is so low, it has a long grace period, and it's big money, and at the same time, it is money that is coming into the economy. So you can see all the advantages. Okay. So if we can get out of the domestic market, interest rates will go down, I can tell you, but and at the same time, is that you have more production, and these companies can actually even pay taxes. So really, that is my plea, and if we can do that with the rest of what we have discussed, I think would be good to go.
Good. Ramadan, ask your question, and
I'm going to answer to ask very short questions so that we can get out of here.
And you make your last point as well.
Honorable Bahati, I will start with you. Government gets projects, and we hire consultants, and they cost these projects. But then in the middle there, before we implement, we vary the cost. The consultant has said this project, this road, should be constructed at $100 million. But then we find have varied it to $120 million. Why does this happen, and why has it remained almost as a new normal in Uganda, varying costs of projects?
Upward.
Not a downward.
Dr. Muhumuza, you know, you have talked a lot about deemed power, and it is within the long-term contracts, as you said. If you were the one in charge, how would you solve this problem?
No, you should
How do you deal with it?
You should actually say when he was in charge. The minister, what did he do?
But you answered that one. You said if you are the president, court martial. So that one is answered.
Ask Mukunda.
Okay, if we are in charge, Dr. Muhumuza, since you have answered that one, if you are in charge, with now GDP down a bit by almost 70 percentage points in the calendar year 2020, and we need to support livelihood programs to transform the country, how would you fund the budget without borrowing? And to my friend Julius,
Hope the question will be as friendly as he is a friend.
I think for you I should ask you this one. Why do you think in Uganda we have decided to continue with the full cost recovery model on electricity, well knowing that it is damaging our capacity to create wealth? Why is full cost recovery model? And what do you think can be alternative? And I think since I came late, you can add me some 20 minutes. And, thank you very much.
20 minutes to go home, that's okay.
Minister.
Who is starting? And we wind up. Who is Mukunda? You can start.
No, I think for me the full cost recovery model, what could be alternative? I think there is the cost we have to pay at this particular moment. Can we renegotiate our contracts? That is one thing we can do. The second, I think we need to invest in other alternative energy sources, the solar we have been talking about, to be able to ensure that we increase the supply. But lastly, for me, I think we should work so hard to evacuate this power, because we continue to pay for power that we are not using, and at the same time we have factories that need the power, which actually they might not get. So for me, I think that could be one way we could work around this. Thanks.
Okay, Dr. Fred?
The question is, we are already in a very hard situation. How do you finance a recovery, or at least even a sustainability? I wouldn't go to borrow new money because I'm already hard pressed. But as we have said, there is money we borrowed and it is in these agreements. I know Muzizi is one of the projects we borrowed the money to build a dam at Muzizi River. The project is coming to an end in June next year. It has not even disbursed $1. That is money available. So I would go back to whoever lent me this money and say, let's reconfigure within the budget, free some of the resources that are wrapped up in projects where it is very clear this project is not going to implement in the next 2 to 3 years. Give me that money and I put it to other needs. Because this is already money I have borrowed. So why borrow new money when I have money sitting in the kitty that is not functioning? And it can be a protracted conversation, but for me it is the only way, as we have said, we have no chicken. How do we hatch this egg without stealing the neighbor's chicken?
Charlie, thank you very much.
Finally.
On the question of cost variations, it is true that in some cases they are genuine cost variations because they are things that come during implementation, issues of different costs because of the foreign exchange, especially those that are related foreign exchange, and also to do with the estimations at the beginning of the projects. But also we know that some of the projects use cost variations actually to determine the ultimate price of the project. So it is like a trick that they use to play that, and we keep an eye. We urge all the implementing agencies to keep an eye on that and not to make it a habit rather than an exception. Thank you very much, Charles, for allowing us here, and to all Ugandans. We just want to remind you that we are here to secure your future.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Honorable Margaret on Zoom all the way from Fort Portal City, thank you very much for being available all the time for the show, for behind the headlines here. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister David Bahati, for accepting to come and discuss this very pertinent issue. I think the discussion, the time was is not 2 hours is not even enough to discuss the challenge of debt burden that we have. A lot of issues, but thanks a lot for finding time this time to come. Thanks a lot, Dr. Muhumuza. Thanks so much, Julius Mukunda, for sharing your views with us and adding to our little knowledge, the ones that you have. Thanks a lot, Gobi. Even if you came late today, we know that you're very committed and you traveled from far. Thanks a lot for finding time. From the entire team here at UBC, from the Behind the Headlines team of producers, all the producers, Ivan, Morris, William, Bills, Fred, all of you, thanks a lot. The technical team that makes sure that this show is available and effectively delivered, thanks a lot, and we cannot thank you enough. Thanks to the camera persons and to you out there especially, who ensures that you watch and you keep sending us the messages. We couldn't read all the messages, there are so many. Suffice to say, keep the debate going on social media, on UBC, on hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. Keep the debate going. Let's continue with it, and we will be responding to some of your issues online. Until next week, God bless you all. Keep safe. Corona is still ravaging the world. It's getting worse in some countries, especially with the change of weather, winter coming in. So don't drop your guns, people. Just know that Corona is still dangerous. Keep your masks on, keep the social distance, and ensure that you sanitize. Wash your hands very well with water and soap whenever you can, so that we can kick Corona out of ourselves, out of our homes. Until next week, bye-bye. God bless you.
Asante.
Coming as the manager, and him and the club sold the club to me once again. I think he went out that summer and signed Stan Collymore and Colin Cooper. Two great investments at the club. And I think on top of that as well, my loyalty to the fans. Reputation and a nickname that says Psycho. It was christened by the Forest fans sometime in the mid-80s. It was a period in football where probably every club had their hard man. I had a feeling, certainly as a player, it was more cold and calculating, probably the way I played. But the other side of that is you're talking about a football player that's been sent off 5 times in 1,000 matches, so once every 200 games probably is not synonymous with the name Psycho. I honestly think I've got a relationship with the fans that surpasses probably any player that's played in football. Honestly, there's probably only a handful that have got